Mom, this is just scrap, my son said. 5 kilos of metal tops. I answered, it's not scrap. These are experimental pieces I've kept for 40 years. A week later, the experts announced, total value, over $25 million. Their greed knew no limits. October's sun warmed the kitchen table, and the kettle rattled like an old bus as it came to a boil. I was 65 that fall, retired 3 years, living quiet in my little blue house on Maple Street. The day I opened the cedar chest again, the whole place smelled of lemon oil and old winters. I laid a towel down, spread it flat with the side of my hand, and brought out the wrapped parcels I'd tucked away for decades. Thin tissue gone the color of tea, string tied in careful double knots. My hands remembered the knots even if the rest of me had grown forgetful. I worked at the jewelry factory in Providence back when the whistles still meant something. When the street out front glittered on Fridays with brass shavings clinging to shoe soles. We did everything: casting, stone setting, plating, polishing. I worked the assembly line, then the experimental bench when my eyesight was sharp and my touch lighter than a moth. Managers brought us ideas that never saw daylight. We tried filigree so fine a sneeze would lift it. We married rose gold with pale enamel, set odd stones that dealers sent as samples, half daring us to make them sing. When a design was scrapped, the pieces were supposed to be melted back, logged, forgotten. Supposed to be, I murmured, untying the first knot. Inside lay a brooch the size of a postage stamp, a scatter of wheat stalks in braided gold, each seed a fleck of champagne diamond. I remembered holding my breath as I soldered those stems so the heat wouldn't bloom the color out of the stones. The second bundle held earrings shaped like teardrops with a skin of translucent enamel, blue as summer milk. Then came the necklace, an odd thing with a clasp hidden in a lily's throat, the petals cut from pale green jade so thin you could read newsprint through them. Experimental, they called them. I called them our late evenings, our steady hands, our breath. The back door opened with its usual sigh. My daughter Carol swept in with a bakery bag in her quick voice. Ma, you shouldn't be up on that step stool alone. What are you doing now? Behind her came my son, Eddie, with his long stride and a sweater flung over one shoulder like a flag. Sunday afternoon, both of them talking at once, moving chairs, setting paper cups, making me feel like a visitor in my own kitchen. I set the brooch down on the towel and turned the kettle off. What's all this? Eddie asked, leaning in. Carol peered, then sniffed like she'd found a button in her soup. Oh, the old trinkets again. Not trinkets, I said. These were trials. They never went to market. I kept a few when the bosses decided to melt them. Nobody cared then. Carol tore the bakery bag and slid a cinnamon bun onto a plate. Ma, you told us this story. You in the factory. Sweet. But you shouldn't keep junk lying around. It's not safe. Junk? I reached for the earrings, held them toward the window until the light laid itself thin over the enamel. We tested a new powder. The color holds if you're careful with the torch. I was careful. Eddie laughed, not mean, just careless. Sure, Ma. Careful as a church mouse. Still just a few ounces of metal. You know what coppa's going for? Brass? We could get someone to haul it, put a little cash in your pocket, fix that porch step. It isn't copper, I said. And it isn't brass. Carol touched the brooch with one pink fingernail and wrinkled her nose. It's old. There's a word for it, dated. People wear big beads now. Chunky. Not this. And the stones. She leaned closer. They're tiny. They're diamonds, I said. Tiny diamonds, she answered, sing-song, the way she used to tease Eddie when they were small. I put the brooch back on the towel and folded my hand so I wouldn't shake. The kitchen went quiet except for the clock above the door, the one that ticked like knitting needles. Eddie stood, crossed the room, and tapped the porch railing through the screen. We could use the money, Ma. You've got these objects. There's a guy who comes around, weighs things, gives you a fair price. I'll call him this week. I haven't said I'm giving anything, I answered. They were mine to make and they're mine to keep. Carol set a cup of tea in front of me as if I'd agreed already. You're always saying you want to simplify. Less dusting. Imagine how nice it'll look in here without piles. It's one chest, I said. It's a mindset, she answered. I didn't reply. I unwrapped the necklace last, the lily petals catching the late light. A summer evening came back to me. Windows open over the polishing room, radio playing, our foreman humming. I could smell the rouge and oil, feel the jade cooling the pad of my thumb. I lowered it to the towel, and the room seemed to hush around it. Eddie whistled low, then grinned. Okay, that one's pretty. Still, pretty doesn't pay gas. He looked at Carol. I'll set it up. There's a man with a little storefront near the post office. Evaluate scrap. He comes by Tuesdays. Carol nodded briskly. Perfect. We'll be here. We'll make it easy. I gathered the tissue and folded it, smoothed my towel and stood, though my knees didn't like it. No one comes here unless I say. Of course, Carol said too quickly. We're only trying to help. Eddie's smile stayed easy. Just information, Ma. No pressure. I slid the parcels back into the cedar chest, each in its corner like sleeping children. I pressed the lid and the lock clicked. Outside, a breeze moved the maple leaves and scattered gold across the floor. They're not going anywhere today, I said. Tuesday then, Eddie replied as if I hadn't spoken, already halfway out the door with the bakery bag. Carol kissed my cheek, light as a paper bow, and followed him. The screen door side closed. The clock resumed its knitting. I stood alone, my palm on the cedar, feeling the faint, steady heartbeat of the house. I remember the day so clearly, like a bad taste that won't wash out of your mouth. It was a Tuesday morning, the kind where the air smells faintly of damp leaves, and I had just finished setting the kettle on the stove. My knees ached a little from the weather, but I felt content, humming a tune I half remembered from the radio back in the 70s. That's when I heard voices out on the porch, my children. They didn't know I was in the kitchen with the window open. Their laughter came through first, sharp and careless. Can you believe it? My son chuckled. She really thinks those old trinkets are treasures. Just a few kilos of scrap metal, that's all. My heart tightened. I set down the teacup and leaned closer, straining to hear. His wife added, We'll call in the scrap guys today. They'll haul it off, melt it down. Might get enough for some new appliances if we're lucky. Another laugh, quick and dismissive. For a moment I thought maybe I'd misheard. Surely my own children wouldn't talk about the pieces that way. Pieces I'd kept hidden, carried from job to job, wrapped in old rags, tucked into drawers like secret songs. I had guarded them for 40 years. I never sold them, never showed them, because back then they weren't supposed to leave the factory. I stepped onto the porch, my cardigan pulled tight across my shoulders. Excuse me. My voice shook, but not from weakness. Did I just hear you call my collection junk? They turned, surprised but not guilty. My son shrugged, that same careless tilt of the head he used as a teenager when I caught him sneaking cigarettes. Mom, he said like he was explaining arithmetic to a stubborn child. Those are just leftovers. Old test pieces from a factory no one even remembers. They're not worth anything except the metal. We're just trying to help you clear out the clutter. Clutter. I repeated, my throat tightening. I thought of the delicate filigree rings, the strange settings with stones I'd never seen in stores, the pendants with designs too daring for Soviet shops. They weren't clutter. They were memory, skill, defiance captured in gold and silver. My daughter folded her arms, impatient. Mom, you're living in the past. These aren't treasures. You should be grateful we're taking the time to deal with them. Otherwise, they'll just rot in that old chest of yours. I felt heat rising in my cheeks. Rot? Do you know how many hours I spent at that factory? Do you know the hands that shaped those pieces, the ideas behind them? They were experiments, dreams in metal. and I kept them safe. They exchanged glances, the kind that cut a person down without words. My son sighed loudly. Mom, please. It's junk. Let's not romanticize it. The evaluators are already on their way. We'll get a fair price for the scrap, and you won't have to worry about it anymore. My hands trembled, but I clenched them tight against my apron. I don't want evaluators. I didn't ask you to sell them. His wife laughed, light and cruel. Well, you don't exactly use them, do you? They're just sitting there collecting dust. Better to turn them into cash than cling to fairy tales. Fairy tales. That's what they thought of my life, of the work that built their shoes, their school books, their very childhoods. My breath came shallow, but I stood tall on that porch. You will not sell them, I said, my voice lower now, steadier. Those pieces are mine. But even as I said it, I saw the look in their eyes, patience stretched thin, the smirk of children who think they know better. They weren't listening. To them, I was just an old woman clinging to shiny scraps, too sentimental to see sense. Inside, the kettle whistled shrilly, but none of us moved. The sound filled the silence between us, shrill and desperate. Finally, my son shrugged again. Fine, Mom. Believe what you want. But you'll see. They're just metal, nothing more. They walked down the steps, their laughter picking up again as though nothing serious had happened. I stood frozen on the porch, listening to their voices fade down the path, the kettle still screaming in the kitchen. That was the moment, sweetheart, when something broke inside me. Not the way it breaks when you drop a cup, but the way a tree cracks in a storm. A deep sound that means something old and strong is shifting forever. I went back inside, turned off the stove and sat at the table. My hands rested on the wood grain, and I stared at them, wrinkled, veined, but steady. These were the same hands that had polished stones, soldered chains, set clasps. Hands that had carried secrets through decades. And now my own children wanted to throw it all away, laughing as they did. I didn't cry. Not then. Instead, I reached for the key I kept in the cookie jar. The one that unlocked the old cedar chest in my bedroom. Slowly, carefully, I opened it. Inside, wrapped in yellowed cloth, the pieces gleamed softly in the dim light. Rings, brooches, pendants, shapes I hadn't seen anywhere else. Not scrap. Not junk. A history they didn't understand. I touched one, a small pendant shaped like a flame. Its stone catching the afternoon light. My reflection wavered in its surface and I whispered to it. They don't know you. But I do. And in that whisper I made a promise. I would not let them erase what I had kept alive all these years. A few days passed before the next storm rolled in. I had been keeping quiet, moving slowly around the house, my chest still tight from the way they laughed on the porch. I thought maybe, just maybe, they cooled off and decided to leave well enough alone. Then my grandson came by. He's a tall boy now, taller than his father, with that same way of standing in the doorway like he owns the place. He had a folder tucked under his arm and a too bright smile plastered on his face. Hi, Grandma, he said, stepping inside without waiting for me to answer. I've got some papers here. Dad thought it'd be best if we made everything official. I wiped my hands on my apron. Official? What for? Oh, just housekeeping, he said quickly, setting the folder on the kitchen table. You know, a declaration. To protect you, to make sure everything's documented properly. The chest, the jewelry, well, the metal, I mean. We don't want anyone making trouble down the line. He spoke smoothly but too fast. I'd been around long enough to know when someone was trying to rush me past the details. Go ahead, Grandma, he urged, sliding a pen across the table toward me. Just sign here and it'll keep things simple. No headaches later. I didn't touch the pen. Instead, I opened the folder. The papers were thick with legal words, long sentences twisted up like brambles. My eyes aren't what they used to be, but I could still make out the bold title, Power of Attorney. The air in the room went cold. This isn't a declaration. I said slowly, my finger tapping the heading. This gives control. To you. He shifted in his chair, still smiling, but I saw the twitch in his jaw. It's just standard wording. Everyone does it. It's for your protection. My protection? I looked at him hard. Or your convenience. He laughed, light and false, the way a boy laughs when he's caught with his hand in the sugar jar. Come on, Grandma. Don't be so suspicious. You know we only want what's best for you. What's best for me, I said, pushing the folder back across the table, is to keep my own keys in my own hands. I didn't work all my life to be tricked by a piece of paper. His smile faltered. You don't trust me? I folded my arms. Trust has to be earned, not slipped under someone's nose with a pen. For a moment his eyes hardened, the charm slipping. I saw his father's impatience there, the same look I'd seen on the porch. Then he sighed and gathered the papers. Fine. I was just trying to help. He stuffed the folder back under his arm, stood up, and kissed the top of my head quickly, like he was playing the part of a dutiful grandson. Think about it, okay? He said, heading for the door. It would make things easier. The screen door clicked shut behind him, and I sat there in the stillness, my heart pounding. Easier for them, yes. Not for me. I walked back to my room, to the cedar chest. My hands lingered on the lid, on the cool metal of the lock. I thought of how many years I'd guarded it without anyone knowing. And now suddenly they were circling like crows. I knew then this wasn't just about family squabbles or clutter. They wanted control. Control over something they hadn't built, hadn't protected, hadn't understood. And they thought I was weak enough, soft enough, to hand it over with a shaky signature. But I hadn't survived 65 years by being foolish. Not in the factory, not in my marriage, not through lean winters when the cupboards echoed. I closed the chest and straightened up. They might call me sentimental. They might call me stubborn. But I would not be deceived. Not by strangers. And certainly not by my own blood. It was a quiet Thursday afternoon when the phone rang, one of those slow, dragging days where even the clock seemed to hesitate between ticks. I almost didn't answer. But when I lifted the receiver and heard the voice on the other end, my breath caught. Lydia? He asked. It's Pavel. Pavel Kirov. I hadn't heard that name in over 30 years. Pavel had been an engineer at the factory back in the old days, one of the clever ones who always carried a notebook full of sketches. He was the kind of man who could look at a problem, too much heat, not enough airflow, enamel cracking, and solve it with a few strokes of his pencil. Pavel, I said slowly, the syllables tugging old dust off my memory. How in the world did you find me? I was in town visiting my niece, he explained. I ran into your neighbor at the market. She mentioned you were still here, still on Maple Street. And she also mentioned something about jewelry pieces. I tightened my grip on the phone, my neighbor and her chatter. But Pavel's voice was steady, curious, not mocking. Yes, I said carefully. I still have some things from the factory. Experimental pieces. Why? For a moment there was silence, then a sharp intake of breath. Lydia, do you have any idea what you're holding? Those weren't just scraps. They were prototypes, one-of-a-kind works. Unique alloys, uncut stones from Siberia, designs that were never released to the public. I sank into the kitchen chair. Everyone keeps saying they're worthless. Just metal. They're wrong, Pavel said firmly. Those pieces were never meant for the market because the party wanted safe designs, things they could mass produce. What you kept, those were experiments with no equal. Some of us whispered even then that if they ever surfaced, they would be priceless. I didn't answer at once. My eyes drifted toward the cedar chest in the bedroom. Priceless. The word made my skin prickle. Listen to me, Pavel continued, his voice low. You must be careful. If your family believes it's scrap, they'll treat it like scrap. But collectors, museums, even governments, they would see something else. Heritage. Rarity. Value beyond money. That night I barely slept. His words circled in my mind, louder than the crickets outside. I thought of the wheatstock brooch, the lily necklace, the enamel earrings. I remembered the factory floor. The men in gray coats who never explained where the strange stones came from, only that we should handle them gently. I remembered whispers, Ceylon sapphires, Brazilian aquamarine, shipments from far-off mines none of us could pronounce. The next morning I invited Pavel over. He arrived with the same careful steps I remembered, though his hair was thinner and his glasses thicker. He sat at my kitchen table, the same one I'd scrubbed for 40 years, and I brought out the cedar chest. When I unwrapped the first bundle, he didn't touch it right away. He just looked, his eyes shining. "Do you realize," he whispered, "this is the only surviving piece from the 1972 collection?" The design team spent 6 months perfecting the enamel mixture, and then it was scrapped overnight. They said the process was too expensive. I thought it was gone forever. He picked up the brooch, turning it carefully in his hands. And this, look at the setting. Champagne diamonds. They didn't even admit to importing those in those years. "Lydia, this isn't scrap. This is history." I felt my throat tighten. "My children, they want to sell it for weight." Pavel set the brooch back down gently. "If they succeed, it will be melted and lost forever. You mustn't allow it. You need real experts, independent ones, people who understand what this is." For the first time in weeks, I felt a flicker of something, hope maybe, or defiance. I had been made to feel like a foolish old woman, clinging to fairy tales. But here was a man who knew, who remembered. "I'll find the right people," Pavel said as he stood to leave. He placed a hand on mine, warm and steady. "But Lydia, promise me one thing. Don't sign anything. Not until you know the truth." Promised. And that evening, when I locked the cedar chest again, I no longer felt like I was guarding junk. I was guarding a legacy. Pavel didn't waste time. 2 weeks later, he returned with 2 men and a woman. They weren't dressed like the scrap buyers my children had talked about. No overalls, no greasy scales, no hurried glances at the weight of things. These people wore gloves, carried magnifying loupes around their necks, and spoke in low, careful tones. "Independent experts," Pavel explained. "Trusted people. They work with museums." I hesitated at the door, the cedar chest still locked behind me. My son had already been calling twice a day, asking if I'd come to my senses. He thought the scrap man's visit had been postponed only because of my stubbornness. If he knew strangers were here to see the collection, I dreaded to think what storm he'd bring. But something in Pavel's eyes, steady, insistent, gave me courage. I carried the parcels out, unwrapped them one by one, laying them across the kitchen table on a white cloth. For a moment no one spoke. Then the woman, a silver-haired specialist with sharp eyes, let out a quiet gasp. "Good Lord," she whispered, lifting the brooch with gloved fingers. "Where did this come from?" "The Providence Jewelry Factory," I said, my voice thin but steady. "1970s. I worked there." They leaned in, examining every angle. One man adjusted his loupe, his breath fogging the stone as he inspected the clasp. Another jotted notes furiously in a small leather book. The woman turned the brooch over, her eyes wide. "These are champagne diamonds," she said, her voice trembling slightly. "Natural. Untreated. Do you understand, Mrs. Ivanova? A brooch like this could fetch $500,000 at auction." $500,000. The number hung in the air like a shout. My knees nearly gave way, and I gripped the edge of the table. "And this," the younger man said, lifting the lily necklace, "is beyond jewelry. It's art. Jade petals this thin, it's nearly impossible. The craftsmanship is extraordinary. I've never seen anything quite like it." They moved from piece to piece. their voices rising with excitement. Enamel still intact after 40 years. Experimental alloy. Stones from mines closed decades ago. Finally, the older man sat back, removing his glasses. He looked straight at me. Mrs. Ivanova, these items are not scrap. They're treasures. Unique, irreplaceable. The kind of pieces collectors fight wars over. Together, they could be worth tens of millions of dollars. The kitchen went silent except for the ticking clock above the stove. I stared at the shimmering pieces spread across my old table. The same table where my children had once spilled milk and scribbled homework. Tens of millions. Pavel smiled faintly, almost sadly. I told you, Lydia. You were guarding history. I didn't know what to say. My heart pounded in my chest, not with joy but with fear. My children, what would they do when they heard? And they did hear. That evening my daughter showed up at my door with a basket of fruit, all smiles and sweetness. She kissed my cheek, her perfume too strong, and sat down without asking. Mom, she said gently, we've been thinking. We were wrong to push you. These pieces, they're important to you and we respect that. Of course we do. Her tone was syrupy, rehearsed. I knew then they'd spoken to Pavel, or someone else had whispered the truth into their ears. We just want to help you, she went on. You're not getting younger and handling all this paperwork, insurance, safekeeping, it's too much. Let us take care of it. For you. I looked at her across the table, at the way her smile didn't reach her eyes. My son arrived the next morning, saying almost the same words, only louder, more forceful. Mom, come on. We'll protect your interests. We'll manage everything. You don't need this kind of stress. Their sudden concern felt colder than their earlier laughter. They didn't see treasures, they saw numbers, money, power. I sat quiet, hands folded in my lap, nodding here and there while their voices swirled around me. But inside, a new resolve was hardening. They thought they could trick me into signing papers, into handing it all over. But now I knew. I knew the truth of what I had guarded for half my life. And I would not let greedy hands melt it down. Not for cash, not for convenience, not for anyone. The shocking news had changed everything. For them it had stirred hunger. For me it had lit a fire. The news spread quicker than spilled milk across a table. It wasn't 2 days after the experts left my kitchen that my son and daughter marched back in, their voices soft and their smiles sharper than knives. Mom, my son began, sitting across from me, we're sorry for not believing you. Truly. You were right. These pieces are special. My daughter chimed in, setting a box of pastries on the table like it was a peace offering. We've already arranged something to help you. A second opinion. You deserve clarity, don't you? Clarity. The word rolled bitter in my mouth. But I stayed quiet, watching them set out their papers and speak in rehearsed tones. The following morning, they returned with 2 men in stiff suits. They introduced themselves as evaluators. No gloves, no notebooks, no careful handling. Just slick hair and quick hands. One of them scooped up the wheatstock brooch between his thick fingers, turning it like it was a coin from a vending machine. This, he snorted. Old-fashioned. Stones too small, gold brittle. Maybe worth a few hundred in scrap. My daughter leaned forward, nodding earnestly. See, Mom? That's what we thought too. Don't you feel better knowing the truth? The other man held the lily necklace up to the light. He didn't even bother with magnification, just squinted and shrugged. Flawed work. Fragile. Not marketable. No collector would bother. You're looking at sentimental value only, madam. Financially, zero. I kept my face calm, though inside I felt heat rising. Pavel's experts had trembled with excitement, whispering about museums and tens of millions. These men, with their slick suits and dismissive tones, couldn't have been clearer liars if they'd worn signs around their necks. My son put a hand on mine, all gentle now. Mom, don't let others confuse you. These people, he meant Pavel's experts. They want to use you, inflate your hopes. We're your family. Trust us. Let us take care of this quietly. Trust us. My throat burned at the words. Trust from children who'd laughed about scrap metal, who now brought imposters to my kitchen table. I looked at the pastries untouched, sitting between us like props in a staged play. And these gentlemen? I asked evenly. Where are they from? Oh, a reputable firm, my daughter said quickly. Friends of friends. The best. The man with the brooch grunted. We deal in reality, ma'am. Not fairy tales. I wanted to snatch the piece from his hand, but instead I leaned back, folded my arms and smiled faintly. Reality is a funny thing, I said. It depends on whose eyes are looking. For a moment silence fell. My son's jaw tightened. My daughter reached for my teacup like she could sip away the tension. The men shuffled the jewelry back across the table. Clearly bored, clearly paid. When they left, my children lingered, pressing their case. Mom, please. Don't make this harder than it needs to be. We're just trying to protect you. I stood slowly, my knees stiff but my voice steady. Protect me? By bringing strangers who lie to my face? No. If you want to help, then listen. These pieces are mine. They've always been mine. And no one will take them from me. Their smiles cracked then, and the sweetness drained out of the room. My son muttered something about stubbornness. My daughter sighed, gathering her purse. When they were gone, I locked the cedar chest again and sat at the table in the hush of the house. Outside, the autumn wind rattled the maple leaves. I thought of Pavel's steady warning, of the experts' awe, and of my children's false allies. It was clear now. This wasn't just greed. It was a battle of stories. They wanted the story of junk, worthless metal so they could seize control. But I knew the true story, heritage, art, value that no one could measure with a scale. And if I had to stand alone, then so be it. I had guarded these pieces through decades of silence. I could guard them still. After the charade with those false evaluators, I knew I couldn't just sit back and hope things would resolve themselves. My children were circling like hawks, and lies were their weapons. If I wanted to protect the truth, I needed proof, something no smooth-talking stranger or greedy child could sweep aside. That night, I sat with a cup of weak tea, staring at the cedar chest. Then I remembered something, the factory archives. Back in those days, every experiment had to be logged, design sketches, test notes, even little certificates of alloy composition. The bosses loved their paperwork. Most of it was locked away when the factory closed, but some of us had kept bits and pieces. And I'd never been good at throwing things away. The next morning, I climbed the narrow stairs to the attic, the air thick with dust and old wood. My knees protested each step, but I pressed on, dragging a small lamp behind me. I pushed aside boxes of Christmas ornaments and faded quilts until I found what I was looking for. A battered cardboard trunk with Providence 1971 to 1975, scrawled across the lid in my handwriting. I opened it carefully. Inside were notebooks, order slips, and brittle folders. My hands trembled as I sifted through the papers. And there they were, blueprints. Detailed sketches in Pavel's hand, signed with dates and initials. Certificates typed on yellowing paper, stamped with the factory seal. Lists of materials, gold purity percentages, enamel formulas, stone origins. I pressed the papers flat, my breath catching. This wasn't memory. This was evidence. By afternoon, I'd laid everything out across my bed. There was a certificate for the Wheatstock brooch, describing experimental champagne diamonds, sourced from Yakutia. Another for the lily necklace, specifying grade nephrite jade, translucent. I even found a faded photograph. My younger self bent over a bench, tiny flame from the torch lighting my face. When I showed Pavel the next day, his eyes widened. "This is gold, Lydia," he said, though he wasn't looking at metal. These documents prove the pieces exist officially. They can't call them scrap anymore. This is archival proof. His words gave me courage. That evening I locked the chest and packed the documents into a neat folder. I knew my children would keep pushing with their tricks. I needed protection stronger than my word or Pavel's. I needed the state experts, the kind who couldn't be bought with a smile and a pastry box. The following week, I took a bus into the city, clutching the folder like it was a baby. The Cultural Ministry office was in a tall, gray building, its walls lined with shelves of history. I waited under buzzing lights until a woman with iron gray hair called my name. I spread the documents across her desk, my voice trembling as I explained. At first, she looked at me with polite patience, the way clerks do with old women. But as her eyes scanned the stamps, the signatures, the sketches, her expression shifted. She leaned closer. These are original factory records," she murmured. "And you say the items still exist?" "Yes," I said. "Every piece. I kept them safe." She looked at me then, not as a nuisance but as a bearer of something rare. "Mrs. Ivanova, if what you're saying is true, these items aren't just valuable. They may be national heritage. We'll need to conduct an official examination." Her words filled me with both dread and relief. Dread because I knew my children would howl like wolves once they realized what this meant. Relief because for the first time I had someone who saw the truth written in ink and seal. That night, back home, I locked the folder in the cedar chest beside the jewelry. My children still called, still pressed with their sweet voices and hollow promises. But I no longer trembled when they spoke. I had more than memories now. I had proof. The state experts came 2 weeks later. 3 of them, arriving in a gray car that hummed quietly up my drive. They weren't the kind you could mistake for scrap men. Their briefcases clicked open like little safes, and their white gloves glimmered in the autumn sun. My children had tried to shadow every step of the process, but I hadn't told them the date. This was between me, the experts, and the truth. Inside, we spread the pieces on the kitchen table once again. Only this time the air felt heavier. The men and women spoke in careful, measured words, using terms I only half understood. Cultural value, provenance, irreplaceable craftsmanship. They studied every clasp, every hallmark, every faint engraving. At one point, the eldest of them lifted the lily necklace with reverent hands. "This," he said softly, "is not simply jewelry. It is a cultural treasure. The jade work alone is unparalleled, but combined with the design and documented origin, it represents a lost era of artistry." Another leaned over the wheatstock brooch. "Look at this," she said. "Champagne diamonds before they were even recognized in the global market. How many pieces like this exist?" "One. This one. That makes it national heritage." The words national heritage seemed to echo off the kitchen walls. I held my breath, half afraid I'd imagined it. By late afternoon, the experts had finished their work. They packed their instruments, folded their notes, and one of them slid a stamped document across the table toward me. "Mrs. Ivanova," he said formally, "the items you preserved are hereby recognized as cultural treasures. They are protected under state law. Their sale will be strictly regulated, but so will their safekeeping. You are their legal custodian." Custodian. A guardian, not just an owner. My chest tightened with both pride and sorrow. I had saved them all those years, but now their story belonged to more than just me. When my children learned of it, oh, the fury that followed. My son barged through the door, his face red, his voice raised. "What have you done, Mom? You've ruined everything. You've given it all to the government." "I gave nothing away," I said calmly. "The experts only confirmed what I already knew. These pieces were never scrap. They are treasures and they are safe now." "Safe?" he barked. "Safe for who?" "Not for us. Do you know how much money you've cost this family? Tens of millions gone." My daughter chimed in, her voice sharp as broken glass. You always said you loved us, Mom. But you care more about those shiny baubles than your own blood. I stood my ground, hands resting on the cedar chest. I care about the truth. About protecting what's worth more than money. These pieces are history. And I won't see them melted into coins for your pockets. For a moment, the kitchen fell into a silence thick enough to choke on. My children's faces hardened, their eyes cold with betrayal. They had thought I was weak, that I would bend to their tricks and signatures. But now the law stood beside me, stamped and sealed. Later that night, after they'd stormed out, I sat at the table with the stamped paper spread before me. The clock ticked, the kettle hissed, and I felt a weight lift from my shoulders. It wasn't over, I knew that. They would come back angrier, more desperate. But the fraud had been exposed. Their lies of scrap and worthless metal lay in shambles, swept aside by truth stronger than their greed. I touched the brooch, the lily necklace, the enamel earrings, and whispered, "You're safe now." And in that quiet kitchen, for the first time in weeks, I allowed myself to smile. The papers had barely cooled on the kitchen table when the war began. First it was shouting. My son stormed in the very next morning, his fists jammed into his coat pockets, his voice so loud it rattled the window glass. "You've robbed us, Mom. Do you even understand what you've done? Tens of millions gone." I stood at the stove stirring my oatmeal, calm as I could manage. "It was never yours to lose," I said softly. "Those pieces were mine to protect. And now they are safe." "Safe?" His laugh was jagged, sharp. "Safe in a museum vault? Safe in some government ledger? You've locked away our inheritance. You've made us beggars." My daughter arrived that afternoon, her face pale with fury. She set her purse down with a thud and leaned across the table. "You've betrayed us, Mom. After everything we've done for you, you chose strangers over your own children." I looked at her, this woman I had carried, nursed, and kissed goodnight, and I barely recognized her eyes. They were hungry, not for food, not for love, but for wealth. "I chose honesty," I said. "I chose dignity. Those pieces were never meant to be melted down for quick cash." That night the phone calls started. My grandson, his voice tight, urging me to reconsider. Then a lawyer's number I didn't recognize, leaving messages about disputed assets. By the week's end, a letter arrived, official heavy paper, thick envelope. They had filed a claim. My own children dragging me to court. The hearing was a blur of sharp suits and harsher words. My son spoke of sacrifice, of years spent caring for me. My daughter wept theatrically, telling the judge how I had always promised the jewelry would be theirs. When it was my turn, I stood slowly, my knees stiff, my voice steady. "I never promised wealth," I said. "I promised love, and I gave it freely. But this," I gestured toward the photographs of the pieces laid out as evidence, "this is not theirs. These are treasures I preserved with my own two hands. They are part of our country's heritage, not bargaining chips for greedy pockets." The judge listened, stone-faced. The lawyers sparred. The words blurred into noise. But deep down, I knew the truth was stronger than any performance. Weeks later, the ruling came. The items were officially declared state-protected heritage. I remained their legal custodian, but my children had no claim to sell or profit from them. Their lawsuits, their shouting, their pleas, it all crumbled against the law's shield. You'd think that would end it. But no. The war shifted from courts to whispers, from legal threats to bitter visits. "Do you know what you've done to us?" my son hissed one evening, leaning over the porch rail. "You've ruined your own family." "No," I said quietly, meeting his eyes. "Greed ruined us. They stopped bringing fruit baskets. They stopped pretending to care. Instead, they came with demands, accusations, venom in their voices." The house felt colder after each visit, the air heavy with disappointment I hadn't chosen but couldn't chase away. One night I sat alone at the kitchen table, the cedar chest beside me. I ran my fingers over the wood grain, remembering when my children were small, when they would bring me dandelions from the yard, when their laughter was pure, when I believed love was enough to hold us together. Now they looked at me not as a mother, but as an obstacle, a locked door between them and riches. And yet even through the hurt I stood firm. I had lived long enough to know some wars aren't won by shouting back. They're won by holding the line, by refusing to surrender what's right. I didn't know how long the fight would last, but I knew this. I could lose my family's kindness, their company, even their love, but I would not lose the truth. Not after all these years. The house was quiet the morning I made my decision. The sun filtered through the lace curtains, painting little patterns across the cedar chest at my feet. For months it had been the battlefield between me and my children. Our love turning to suspicion, their voices turning to threats. I had fought as best I could, but I was tired of war. It was time to decide what would become of the treasures I had kept hidden most of my life. I brewed a pot of tea, poured it into my best porcelain cup, and carried the steaming drink to the table. One by one I unwrapped the pieces, brooch, necklace, earrings, rings, spreading them out across the white cloth like soldiers after a long march. They glowed in the morning light, fragile yet fierce, as if they were waiting for me to speak. "You've been mine long enough," I whispered. "Now you belong to more than me." That afternoon, I took the bus into the city, the folder of archival documents tucked under one arm and the carefully packed chest under the other. The bus driver offered to carry it for me, but I shook my head. This weight was mine to bear. At the Ministry of Culture, I met the same silver-haired woman who had once examined the pieces. She greeted me warmly and listened as I explained my decision. "I want part of the collection donated to the National Museum," I said, my voice steady. "Let people see them, learn from them. They don't belong locked away forever." She nodded, her eyes kind. "And the rest?" "The rest will go into a fund," I said. "An educational charity for young artists, jewelers, dreamers who need a hand to start. If these treasures began as experiments, let them inspire new ones." Her smile was small but genuine. "Mrs. Ivanova, that is a legacy worthy of these pieces." The paperwork took hours, but by the end of the day it was done. The brooch, the necklace, the earrings, they no longer sat in my chest alone. They had a new future, safe and honored. The newspapers caught wind of it within a week. A headline ran with my picture: "The woman who saved a hidden heritage." Reporters came knocking, asking for stories of the old factory, the nights of soldering, the quiet acts of preservation. For the first time I told the truth, not to boast but because the world deserved to know. Strangers wrote letters thanking me. Schoolchildren sent drawings of jewelry, designs they dreamed of making. One little girl wrote, "When I grow up I want to be like you, brave." But not everyone celebrated. My son and daughter stormed back into my kitchen, angrier than ever. "You've robbed us twice now," my son shouted. "First you give it to the government, now to strangers in a museum. We're your family. We deserved that money." I stood at the sink rinsing my teacup, calm as a still pond. "You deserved my love," I said softly. "And you had it. But love is not measured in dollars, and greed is not family." My daughter's eyes filled with tears, but they weren't the tears of sorrow. They were hot, furious tears of loss. "You'll regret this," she hissed, snatching up her purse. "Perhaps," I said. "But I'd regret more if I let history be destroyed by careless hands." They left, the door slamming hard enough to rattle the windows. I watched them go without following, without pleading. That part of me, the mother who bent, who hoped, who forgave too quickly, had been burned away in this long war. In the weeks that followed, the house grew quiet again. No angry footsteps, no shouting voices. Only the hum of the kettle, the tick of the clock, the rustle of newspaper clippings telling the story of an old woman who had protected something beautiful. I wasn't wealthy in their eyes. They saw nothing but money they could no longer touch. But in the eyes of the children who visited the museum, in the hands of the young artists who would one day shape gold and stone with their own steady fingers, I was richer than I had ever been. One evening I sat on the porch, a blanket across my knees, watching the sun slip behind the maple trees. I thought of the factory floor, the sparks flying, the hiss of metal cooling. I thought of the secrets I had carried in cloth bundles, of the long years when no one knew, and I thought of my decision, not to leave behind wealth that would rot in greedy hands, but to leave behind a legacy that would grow, inspire, endure. The treasures were no longer mine alone, and for the first time that thought brought me peace. My dears, if in this story you saw yourselves, be sure to write about it in the comments. I would be very interested to read it. Thank you.